frozen mind, the scholar, the magician, and the dream yogis. Prologue. The night sky over London, splayed with blinking stars barely visible through the haze of light pollution, was a silent witness to the moment when Dr. Alistair Harrow first decided that dreams, illusions, and consciousness were more than passing curiosities. Something about the infinite distance of those pinpricks of light, mirrored in the infinite depths of the human mind, nudged him into a realm of inquiry that had consumed philosophers, mystics, and scientists for millennia. Little did he know that this flicker of curiosity, stoked by an encounter with a performer famous for superhuman feats, would soon transport him into Himalayan heights, ancient libraries, and dreamscapes that transcended logic. In these pages unfolds the tale of one scholar's obsession with the boundary between waking and dreaming, and the unearthly places such obsessions can lead. Episode 1. The Seed of Obsession. 1. Shadows in the Lecture Hall. Dr. Alistair Harrow, a gaunt and somewhat pallid figure nearing 40, settled into a seat in the University of London's Grand Lecture Hall. A hush fell over the 100 or so students and a handful of faculty. Ornate columns and vaulted ceilings lent the space an air of gravitas. Dust motes danced in the sunlight that filtered through towering windows, each speck a tiny cosmos that swirled in the stillness. Alistair's specialty lay at the intersection of neuropsychology and consciousness studies. He had published in reputable journals, articles with titles like Hypnagogic Images, Gateways to the Unconscious Mind, and the Neurophysiology of Lucid Dreaming. Though well respected, he was often dismissed as esoteric, a man who found significance in phenomena most psychologists regarded as fringe. Indeed, few had patience for theories that consciousness might extend into realms typically reserved for mystics and poets. This morning, however, the speaker was none other than David Blaine, the renowned magician and endurance artist. Blaine was notorious for stunts that tested the limits of human physiology, being buried alive, fasting for weeks in a transparent box over the Thames, submerging himself in a sphere of water, and, most famously, encasing himself in a block of ice for 63 hours and 42 minutes in Times Square. Alistair had come not as a fan of illusions, but to probe Blaine's claims of strange hallucinations and dreamlike states that emerged during his feats. Word on the academic grapevine suggested that after about 50 hours in the ice, Blaine had begun experiencing uncommonly vivid visions. Alistair's curiosity thrummed. Were these hallucinations merely the result of exhaustion and hypothermia, or did they represent a deeper portal into the architecture of the mind? 2. The Magician Speaks. Blaine took the stage with a subdued confidence. He wore a simple black jacket and jeans, no flashy costume or dramatic flourish. Applause greeted him, then trailed into an expectant hush. "Thank you for having me," he began in a low, resonant voice. "I'm here to talk about pushing the boundaries of human potential. People often ask if my endurance feats are illusions. They're not. They're real challenges to the body and the mind." He recounted highlights of his career: the illusions, the physically taxing stunts, near-death brushes, and unwavering determination. Then, with a pause that seemed to gather the room's collective breath, he turned to his frozen-in-time ordeal. "For 63 hours and 42 minutes, I was in a block of ice in Times Square," he said, his eyes scanning the audience. "I'd prepared for the cold, the isolation, the hunger. But around the 50-hour mark, something changed. I began to see lights, shapes, like the edges of reality were bending. I'd catch glimpses of scenes unfolding around me, almost as if I were dreaming while fully awake." From the back row, Alistair leaned forward, pen moving feverishly across his notepad. Blaine described how the visions were not just fleeting flickers. Some coalesced into what he called narrative vignettes. At one point, he thought he saw a robed figure chanting inside the ice with him. Blaine allowed a small, ironic smile to curve his lips. It's easy to dismiss as hallucination from stress or sleep deprivation, but it felt deeper, like my mind was stepping into a dream realm. After I was released, I searched for any precedent or parallel experiences. One name that kept cropping up was the Tibetan snow yogis, practitioners of Tummo who can generate heat, remain in freezing temperatures, and explore what they call dream yoga. Alistair's heart pounded. There it was. Tummo and Dream Yoga, rumored to be the hidden impetus behind the Himalayan yogis' feats of cold endurance. This lecture was worth every minute, every second. He scribbled the words Tummo, Dream Yoga, Tibetan traditions, internal heat, underlining them twice. Third, an exchange of obscure notes. After the lecture, Blaine agreed to a short Q&A. The line of students and faculty was long, each person eager to ask about illusions, street magic, or the mental grit needed for his stunts. Alistair waited, half thinking that Blaine would be whisked away before he had his chance. When his turn finally came, he introduced himself quietly. Dr. Alistair Harrow, Psychology Department, specializing in altered states of consciousness. Blaine's expression shifted. He looked intrigued. Yes, I recall reading a piece by you. Something about the edges of dreamless sleep and the emergence of imagery. Alistair's eyebrows shot up. I'm surprised you found that. It was in an academic journal, quite specialized. I like to read widely, Blaine replied. What's on your mind? Alistair posed his burning question. You mentioned seeing a robed figure chanting. Do you recall details, specifically around the language or the appearance? Blaine closed his eyes momentarily, as though replaying the scene. Dark burgundy robes, maybe a deep maroon, shaved head, chanting, but not in English. It might have been Tibetan. It was too faint, and I was too cold to even respond. Alistair's heart raced. Have you come across references to Tummo or Dream Yoga in your subsequent research? With an enigmatic smile, Blaine shook his head. Only surface-level stuff. The real knowledge is hidden away in remote monasteries. The challenge is that it's more than a physical discipline. It's deeply entwined with a metaphysical worldview. They parted ways with a brief handshake. For Alistair, the conversation was a lightning rod, electrifying his existing theories. He had long suspected that the Himalayan yogis' practice of generating heat in the cold was not merely a physical skill. The real impetus, he believed, lay in harnessing extreme states, like cold or prolonged wakefulness, to slip into a realm where dreams merge with waking reality. The spark of scholarly obsession. That night, Alistair returned to his modest flat in Bloomsbury, near the British Museum. He set his notes on his cluttered desk, the lamplight revealing circles of coffee stains on scattered monographs. The focal point of his desk was a thick binder labeled Comparative Consciousness Studies, Field Notes and Preliminary Hypotheses. Flipping through it, he paused at a section titled Himalayan Traditions. He had scribbled lines from anthropology texts describing monks in Ladakh and Tibet who wore only thin robes in sub-zero conditions. They were rumored to melt snow around them with body heat alone, a skill known as tummo or inner fire meditation. But deeper references suggested that controlling body temperature was only the exoteric manifestation. The real esoteric dimension was the cultivation of lucid awareness in the dream state, referred to as milam, dream yoga in Tibetan, bridging the lines between waking illusions and dream illusions. He read over a passage he had highlighted months ago. For the advanced practitioner, the boundary between dream and wakeful reality dissolves. This leads to an unbroken continuum of awareness. One sees life itself as a dream, malleable and ephemeral. Alistair shivered, partly from excitement, partly from the creeping sense that if one truly believed the world was a dream, what tethered one to conventional reality? He considered the neurological correlates of such a state. Continuous REM-like brain activity intruding into waking consciousness, or some alteration in the default mode network. For the yogis, these details were irrelevant. What mattered was direct experience. The next morning, after only a few hours of restless sleep, Alistair roamed the campus library. He found references to how sleep deprivation alone could cause vivid hallucinations or micro-sleeps, bridging the conscious and unconscious mind in spurts. But the synergy of cold endurance plus wakefulness was rarely studied. Could the Tibetan yogis have discovered a potent combination for deliberately inducing stable hypnagogic states? As he dug deeper, he realized a once shuttered aspect of his mind was thrown wide open. He was in new territory. He began telling close colleagues that he suspected the snow yogis practiced tummo, not just to keep warm, but to harness the threshold between waking and dreaming, pushing the body to extremes so that consciousness might bloom with hallucinations, controlled and observed from a vantage of mindful clarity. The fifth restricted tome. One day, while combing an obscure index in the library's restricted archives, Alistair stumbled upon a cryptic listing: Guyagaba, the secret luminosity of the dream realm. The reference gave almost no details, aside from a date, 1721, and a brief note that it concerned a union of Tummo and Dream Yoga. Alistair's hands trembled as he filled out the necessary forms. The restricted collection was guarded by stern librarians who demanded justifications for every request. He had a small advantage. He was a tenured lecturer, known, if sometimes teased, for his unorthodox research. After some bureaucratic delays, he was granted a 3-hour window to examine the tome under supervision. In the temperature-controlled reading room, a taciturn archivist named Mrs. Crawford retrieved the book from a locked case. It was bound in dark, worn cloth, its pages yellowed and brittle. Upon the cover, faded Tibetan script entwined with archaic Sanskrit transliteration suggested secrecy. Alistair opened it gingerly, the spine crackling in protest, and discovered dense text interspersed with diagrams of human figures in meditative postures, lines of energy swirling around the body. His academic Tibetan was shaky, but English marginalia, left by some long-departed translator, offered clues. Indicates advanced tummo, leading to illusions in waking state, possibly hidden objective behind snow yoga. Another note read, warning, synergy of extreme cold, minimal sleep, and tummo practice can destabilize mind without proper discipline, risk of mania or psychosis. Alistair carefully transcribed what he could, especially an intriguing passage regarding rainbow mind, an untranslatable notion that seemed to describe illusions as ephemeral, luminous, and unreal yet real. He had never been so enthralled. Here was textual evidence that the snow yogi's real interest lay in harnessing dreamlike visions that manifested only under the direst physical stress, an advanced route to glimpsing the illusory nature of all phenomena. When Mrs. Crawford tapped her watch, signaling his time was up, Alistair's heart sank. He closed the tome reverently, mind brimming with revelations. He knew he had to try the practice, though caution tugged at him. The text insisted on mentorship by a qualified adept. But where to find such a teacher? Tibetan monasteries were notoriously secluded. Some had no interest in teaching outsiders. Still, the next step was clear. He would attempt a preliminary self-experiment, just enough to sense whether these claims held truth. And then, if it proved fruitful, he would do whatever it took, even traveling halfway around the world, to find the guardians of this knowledge. Episode 2.
First, forays into the unknown.
1. A chilling experiment in Bloomsbury. Winter descended on London like a grey shroud, the damp air seeping into every crevice. Alistair chose a weekend when he had no teaching duties. He turned off the heat in his flat, opened a couple of windows to let the temperature drop, and prepared a single space heater in his bedroom, just to prevent dangerously low temperatures. He laid out yoga mats and thick blankets in his living room. From the library notes, he gleaned the rudiments of tummo breathing, sometimes called vase breathing, where one inhales deeply, visualizing energy pooling in the abdomen, then holds it, letting a sense of internal warmth expand. He also had the mantra, hung scribbled in the margins of his notes, brief but referencing the unity of body, speech, and mind, hung. He planned to stay awake as long as possible, ideally over 24 hours. Armed with thermoses of hot water and herbal tea, he removed extra clothing so the cold would be noticeable. He settled on the mat. Slowly, carefully, he practiced the vase breathing. Hour after hour, he breathed and chanted, ignoring the growing ache of hunger. By midnight, he was about 14 hours into wakefulness, the room near 10 degrees Celsius. An uncomfortable chill set in his bones. He tried to maintain internal heat, imagining a flickering flame in his belly. At times, a fleeting warmth bloomed, but it vanished when his concentration wavered. Around hour 18, exhaustion gnawed his mind. Shadows in the corners of the room seemed to shift. He remembered reading that sleep deprivation induces hypnagogic micro-hallucinations. Straining to focus, he repeated the mantra, attempting to observe these illusions without being frightened. Strange shapes emerged at the edges of his vision, swirling colors, half-formed faces. By hour 20, fatigue was overwhelming. His mind was drifting. A quick jolt of adrenaline shot through him when he thought he saw a robed silhouette gliding past the kitchen door. Rationally, he knew no one was there, but the vividness was jarring. His entire body shivered despite the Tummo attempt. He sipped lukewarm tea, feeling a sense of panic. The instructions in Guyagaba had emphasized a stable posture, unwavering concentration, and incremental training under guidance. He was winging it, rummaging in the dark. At hour 22, he experienced his first snap dream. One moment he was awake, eyes half-lidded, focusing on breath. The next moment, he was in a scene, a snowy mountaintop with a chanting monk. It lasted mere seconds before he jerked awake, heart hammering. This, he realized, was the phenomenon David Blaine described, waking reality and dream content merging. Yet soon after, he began trembling uncontrollably, lightheaded. The cold was too much, the fatigue too intense. Fear gripped him. Abandoning the experiment, he crawled into bed, turned on the heater, and promptly fell into a dreamless slumber. 2. Reflection and resolution. Alistair awoke late the next day with a throbbing headache, a raw throat from too much forced chanting, and a sense of anticlimax. Yes, he had briefly glimpsed the threshold, those swirling lights and a fleeting dream sequence. But the experience was chaotic, unmoored, and potentially dangerous. He recalled the margin note from the tome. Prolonged wakefulness can lead to fragmentation if not balanced with Tummo. He realized now that Tummo wasn't just about generating heat. It was about stabilizing the body so that the mind could roam dreamscapes without collapsing. The next step was obvious. He had to find a real teacher. London's Tibetan Buddhist community was small but vibrant. Alistair visited a few centers, attending open meditation sessions. Most taught standard mindfulness and compassion practices, valuable but far from the esoteric Tummo or dream yoga he sought. Asking about Tummo often yielded polite smiles or gentle evasions. These were advanced Vajrayana teachings, and not widely given to Westerners without years of preliminary training. Increasingly frustrated, Alistair found references to Himalayan hermitages in Spiti Valley, Lahore, and parts of Tibet. The high-altitude enclaves were rumored to preserve unbroken lineages of Tummo. According to rumors, novices sometimes spent entire winters in isolated huts, using only Tummo for warmth while simultaneously exploring dream practices. Late one evening, as sleet battered his windows, Alistair gazed at a route map pinned to his corkboard. He had circled remote regions around the Indo-Tibetan border. Am I really going to do this? He thought. The answer crystallized in his chest. Yes, he would. 3. A scholar's leap of faith. A leave of absence from the university required formal paperwork. Alistair cited field research on cross-cultural practices of advanced meditation. His departmental chair, only half joking, muttered that Alistair was chasing ghosts, but he signed off the forms. Colleagues offered well wishes, a few teased him about turning into a mountain hermit. Before departing, Alistair pored over various translations of texts like the Bardo Thodol, sometimes called the Tibetan Book of the Dead, intrigued by how it described intermediate states between life, death, and dreaming. If these people had charted the intermediate states of death, might they not have thoroughly explored the borderlands of sleep as well? Indeed, advanced practitioners were said to maintain lucid awareness even through death. Dream yoga, then, was only the beginning. Clutching a battered copy of Guya Garba notes and the few mantras he had gleaned, Alistair boarded a flight to New Delhi on a cold January morning. He told no one exactly where he was headed next. In truth, he did not know. He would follow rumors, chase leads, and, if fortunate, find a teacher willing to share secrets locked away in the hush of Himalayan snows. 4. Into the thin air. The connecting flight from Delhi to a high-altitude airport was an exercise in wonder and terror. Flanked by towering peaks, the plane seemed to skim over rugged terrain. The cabin pressure fluctuated. Alistair's ears popped. At the small airport, the shock of icy air assaulted him. Yet the brilliant sunlight at such elevation was dazzling, illuminating distant white summits that shimmered like silent deities. He hired a jeep driver named Tsering, a stocky Tibetan man with wind-burned cheeks. Communication was basic, aided by Tsering's passable English. The roads snaked through valleys, climbing higher. Loose gravel threatened to send them tumbling into ravines at every turn, but Tsering navigated calmly, occasionally muttering Buddhist prayers under his breath. Small villages appeared sporadically, each cluster of stone houses overshadowed by a monastery perched on a rocky outcrop. Prayer flags fluttered in kaleidoscopes of color, bridging temples and ledges. The steep topography forced Alistair to breathe in short gasps. Altitude sickness lurked as a real threat. At last, Tsering halted in a desolate settlement, a single row of crumbling buildings, a lone tea house, and swirling dust devils. "This is as far as I go," Tsering said apologetically. "Beyond here, the roads are not passable for my jeep." Alistair looked around, feeling as if he had stepped into another century. He thanked Tsering and hauled his backpack, stepping into the tea house. The inside was dim, but the warmth from a cast-iron stove enveloped him. A woman in traditional attire ladled butter tea into wooden cups. Two travellers huddled quietly near the stove, exhaling steam. Sipping the rich, salty butter tea, Alistair gleaned that he was near an old monastery rumoured to house advanced Tummo practitioners. The woman introduced him to an elderly gentleman named Dorje, a former monk, perhaps, and the pair conversed in hushed tones. "Yes," Dorje said in accented English, "I know the place you seek. Drakar Taso Monastery, across the snowfields. But they are reclusive. Outsiders rarely welcomed." Alistair lowered his cup, adrenaline surging. "I only want to learn, if they'll permit. I've come a long way." Dorje studied him. Perhaps he saw sincerity, or perhaps something else. Nodding slowly, he offered to guide Alistair. "But be warned, the path is steep and dangerous." 5. The Ascent to Drakar Taso. The following morning, wrapped in layers of clothing, Alistair followed Dorje's sure-footed steps up winding trails. Each breath was an effort, thin air burning his lungs. Occasional pine clusters dotted the lower slopes, but soon gave way to austere rock and snow. The sky was a vivid cobalt, unpolluted by city haze. Dorje sometimes broke the silence with anecdotes about his youth at Drakar Taso. "We practiced Tummo each dawn. Lama Rinchen would have us sit near a frozen stream, wearing only light robes. Over time, we stopped feeling the cold," he said with quiet pride. Alistair's mind soared. It was no urban legend. Dorje had done it himself. But Dorje's tone turned somber. "It takes more than physical training. We must harness the mind. Otherwise, you risk your sanity." After hours of trudging, they reached a plateau. Across a valley of pristine snow lay a cluster of stone buildings perched precariously on a cliff. Drakar Tasso Monastery. Thin plumes of smoke curled into the sky, the only sign of habitation. Snow glittered under the midday sun, a near blinding white. Alistair felt a tremor of awe. Here was a place outside time, a fortress of silence and secrets. His mind thrummed. I'm on the threshold of the unknown. They approached the main courtyard, ringed by fluttering prayer flags. A few maroon-robed monks paused in their tasks, carrying firewood, clearing snow, to gaze at the newcomer. Dorje led Alistair into a small temple building, where the scent of incense mingled with the faint tang of butter lamps. Seated at the far end on a cushion was Lama Rinchen, an elderly monk with bright, piercing eyes that radiated gentleness and insight. Though stooped with age, he exuded an aura of quiet power. Bowing low, Dorje introduced Alistair in Tibetan. Lama Rinchen regarded the visitor calmly, then spoke in measured English. You have traveled far. But understand, we do not reveal our practices for mere curiosity or spectacle. Alistair felt his pulse spike. I'm a scholar of consciousness, Lama Rinchen. I believe your practices hold vital knowledge for all of humanity. I come to learn with respect. The Lama's gaze flicked to Dorje, then returned to Alistair. Silence stretched. Finally, Lama Rinchen inclined his head. Very well. You may stay for a time. But you must follow our ways, our discipline. We shall see if your heart is earnest. Alistair bowed deeply, a surge of relief mingled with apprehension. The real test was about to begin. Episode 3. The Monastic Trials. 1. The Rigors of Monastic Life. Life at Drakar Tasso proved unyielding. Alistair rose with the monks at 4 a.m. for morning prayers in the frigid pre-dawn darkness. Chanting resonated through the temple, a low, sonorous hum that vibrated in his bones. Despite wearing several layers of clothing, he shivered relentlessly. The monks, draped in thin maroon robes, showed little sign of discomfort, perhaps a testament to years of tummo practice. Work duties followed, hauling water from a partially frozen stream, chopping wood, sweeping snow from courtyards. Meals were simple: barley porridge, tsampa, and boiled vegetables. Midday, the monks studied scripture, discussing Buddhist philosophy in Tibetan, with occasional references to Sanskrit texts. Alistair understood only snippets, but the luminous passion in their eyes conveyed dedication. In the evenings, meditation sessions lasted up to 3 hours. Lama Rinchen taught Alistair the very basics: posture, breath, and the necessity to let the mind settle. Without a calm mind, the Lama warned, tummo is dangerous. You might generate heat, but you will burn your mind. Alistair found even the fundamentals challenging. His Western academic approach yearned for bullet-point steps and theoretical frameworks, but here, progress felt more organic, guided by subtle instructions and lived example. He noted how the monks cultivated stillness, like mountain lakes undisturbed by turbulence. 2. Clues to the deeper teachings. Alistair discovered that Tummo and Dream Yoga were part of Anuttara Yoga Tantra, an advanced class of Vajrayana Buddhism. The lamas typically required extensive preliminary practices, hundreds of thousands of prostrations, prayers, and mantras, before revealing Tummo instructions. Yet, occasionally, exceptions were made for those with strong karmic connections or pressing reasons. During lunch breaks, Alistair formed a friendship with a younger monk named Naima, who spoke passable English. Naima hinted at how advanced practitioners engaged in cold retreats, meditating in isolated huts, producing enough internal heat to dry wet sheets draped around their bodies. More intriguingly, they used the synergy of minimal sleep and tummo to explore a lucid dream state they called milam. Yes, Naima said softly, eyes shining. Some of our great adepts see visions so real they can't be distinguished from the outer world. They learn that all phenomena are like dreams. Alistair's scholarly side itched to document everything, but he refrained, respecting the monastery's reticence about note-taking. Instead, he internalized what he could, letting the puzzle pieces align. So many references pointed to the idea that their feats of cold endurance were secondary to the real quest, mastering mind's illusions. 3. A glimpse of Lama Rinpoche's power. One early morning, a thick snowfall blanketed the monastery. Alistair rose in darkness, following the others to the meditation hall. There he noticed Lama Rinpoche seated with his back perfectly straight, a wisp of steam seeming to rise from his body in the frigid room. The hour-long session concluded with chanting, after which Lama Rinpoche approached Alistair. "Come," the Lama said, beckoning him outside. With staff in hand, Lama Rinpoche led him to a small clearing where an icy wind cut across the courtyard. "Observe." Removing his upper robe, Lama Rinpoche stood nearly bare-chested, letting the wind whip against his aged skin. He began a rhythmic breath, sharp inhales, forceful exhales, reminiscent of bellows. A few minutes passed, and Alistair's own teeth chattered just watching. But Lama Rinpoche remained perfectly calm. Then, as if on cue, steam began wafting from the Lama's shoulders. It wasn't a dramatic billow, but distinct enough to be noticeable in the cold air. Alistair gasped, a swirl of awe and scientific curiosity flooding him. This was Tummo in action, the inner fire stoked to keep the body warm. Indeed, laboratory studies on Tummo had sometimes shown increased core temperature in meditators, but seeing it firsthand was almost surreal. Replacing his robe, Lama Rinpoche fixed Alistair with an intent gaze. "The heat is not the goal," he said. "It is the byproduct of harnessing subtle energies, weaving breath, mind, and prana. The real mastery lies in awakening the luminous awareness that underlies dreaming and waking alike." Alistair realized he was staring, mouth slightly open. He bowed, heart pounding. "I understand, Lama. Or at least, I want to." "In time," Lama Rinpoche replied. "But first, you must learn the foundation. We will begin more focused training." Fourth initiation into the foundations. That evening, Lama Rinpoche and a small circle of senior monks conferred in a dimly lit chamber lined with old scriptures. They decided Alistair could receive a preliminary Tummo instruction, an unusual concession. To formalize it, they performed a short ritual, offering prayers for the lineage blessings. Alistair sat quietly, an outsider to these sacred words, yet feeling a palpable energy in the air. Over subsequent days, the Lama taught him a refined version of vase breathing. Alistair practiced letting the breath descend and swirl at the navel center, mentally igniting a small flame. With each inhale, he stoked it. With each exhale, he imagined the fire spreading through energy channels, nadis, in his body. At first, Alistair had trouble. Either he felt too self-conscious or he got lightheaded. But gradually, a gentle warmth blossomed in his abdomen. The first time he sensed that internal heat truly, he broke into a grin like a child discovering a secret toy. "Good," Lama Rinpoche would say in his sparse, encouraging way. "But remain humble. This is only the start." Alistair observed that when the Tummo breath stabilized him physically, it also calmed his mind. Meditation deepened. Subtle vibrations of energy seemed to move along his spine. His dreams at night became more vivid, though he lacked the skill to remain lucid for long. 5. Seeds of Dream Yoga. Nima explained that advanced dream yoga required a cultivated intention carried into sleep. One repeated a short verse before dozing. "May I recognize the dream state. May I realize its illusory nature. May I awaken within the dream for the benefit of all sentient beings." Alistair tried. Night after night he recited these lines, then fell asleep in the monastic dormitory. Some nights he recalled no dreams. Other nights he had fleeting lucidity, realizing he was in a dream only to get excited and wake up. Still, the synergy of tummo during the day and dream intent at night produced glimpses of what might lie ahead. Once, he dreamed of a vast ice field where robed figures guided him through shimmering portals. Another time, he dreamt he was in a library, reading luminous manuscripts that floated in mid-air. He awoke breathless, a pang of longing to return to those uncanny realms. As the weeks rolled on, Alistair integrated deeper into monastery life. Though physically drained by the altitude and cold, he discovered an inner resilience blossoming, fostered by the Tummo training. His rational Western mind softened in the presence of living mysticism. Yet there was an undercurrent of tension. Lama Rinchen had not yet given him permission to combine Tummo with extended wakefulness in extreme cold. The practice, Alistair suspected, was the true path to weaving waking and dreaming illusions. The older monks spoke in hushes about such advanced methods, cautioning that novices often overstepped and slipped into mania. But destiny, or some intangible force, soon intervened, opening a door Alistair both craved and feared to enter. Episode 4. Breaching the Dream-Wake Divide. 1. The Permission Granted. One frosty evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange behind distant peaks, Lama Rinchen summoned Alistair to his private chambers. The room was sparse but warm, heated by a small stove. Butter lamps cast flickering shadows on the walls, highlighting texts in Tibetan script. "Alistair," Lama Rinchen began softly, "you have progressed in the fundamentals. Your concentration is steadier. Your tummo is awakening. It is time for a supervised test." Alistair's pulse quickened. "A supervised test?" The Lama continued. "We have a small chamber on the monastery's northern side, barely shielded from the wind. You will stay awake, practicing tummo, for as long as you can safely manage, while also focusing on the dream state mantras. We shall observe you, ensuring you do not push beyond reason." Though prepared, Alistair felt a knot of nervous excitement coil in his stomach. This was exactly what he'd hypothesized. Minimal sleep, intense cold, tummo for warmth, and a specific meditative approach to keep the mind in a twilight zone of half-dream, half-waking. "Yes, Lama," Alistair managed, bowing. "Thank you for trusting me." 2. Entering the ice chamber. The next night, 2 monks led Alistair to a small stone cell battered by the northern winds. The interior was about 3 meters by 3 meters, with cracks in the walls that let in icy draughts. They provided him with a thermos of hot butter tea, a few barley cakes, and a single blanket. "You must rely on your tummo," said one monk solemnly. "Don't forget to signal if you feel your body failing." Alistair nodded, heart in his throat. He lit a small butter lamp, set it on a ledge, and assumed a cross-legged posture on a thin mat. The door closed with a heavy thud, leaving him in solitude. The hours slid by in slow increments. Alistair inhaled through his nose, visualizing the warm ember in his navel, exhaled through his mouth, imagining the heat radiating out along subtle channels. At first, the technique kept the worst of the cold at bay. He recited the mantra Om Ahung Vajra Guru Padma Siddhi Hung, an expanded chant referencing Padma Sambhava, the legendary figure credited with bringing Vajrayana Buddhism to Tibet. By hour 10, hunger gnawed, but more pressing was the creeping fatigue. His muscles twitched with the need for rest. He drank sips of butter tea, felt fleeting surges of warmth, then the cold reasserted itself. He realized how mental discipline wove into the physical warmth. When his focus lapsed, the chill bit deeper. Around hour 15, illusions began. Faint lights danced on the wall. He wasn't sure if they were real reflections or hallucinations. When his eyes closed for mere seconds, dream fragments intruded. Swirling landscapes, glimpses of robed monks chanting. Somewhere around hour 20, a sharper vision coalesced. He was wide awake, he thought, yet he perceived the silhouette of a figure in the corner, the same deep maroon robes, chanting in a soft cadence that tickled the edges of hearing. Rather than panic, Alistair tried to maintain the posture of an observer. This is an illusion. Let it be. The figure turned slowly, revealing a serene yet inscrutable face, eyes half-lidded in meditative bliss. Alistair felt an indescribable mixture of wonder and dread. His rational mind screamed, "There's no one here," yet his senses told him otherwise. 3. Slipping into the dream. By hour 24, he was near delirium. Micro-sleeps peppered his consciousness, each one catapulting him into a bizarre scenario. In one instant, he was trekking across a luminescent glacier under a sky filled with spinning mandalas. In another, he was seated in a vast library, reminiscent of the British Museum, where each book glowed and sang. Between these episodes, he surfaced to normal awareness, teeth chattering, breath ragged. He forced himself back to Tummo breathing, chanting mantras to anchor his mind. Yet the illusions became more persistent, more tangible. At times, the border between the ice-cold chamber and the dreamscapes felt paper-thin. Suddenly, he saw the robed figure again. This time, it reached out an arm, beckoning him closer. Strangely, Alistair felt no sense of alarm. He allowed himself to relax into the vision. The chanting seemed to resonate in his own chest, echoing the rhythm of his heartbeat. A wave of euphoria surged through him. Colors intensified. The walls seemed to glow. He felt he could perceive every swirl of breath, every swirl of energy in the room. In some intangible sense, he understood that he was on the brink of bridging the dream-wake divide. The illusions were not random hallucinations. They were expressions of his mind's deeper strata, now laid bare by cold, exhaustion, and tummo. 4. The edge of madness. At 30 hours, danger set in. Alistair's body temperature dropped precariously. The tummo practice was slipping, overshadowed by exhaustion. A frantic pounding on the chamber door signaled that the supervising monks were concerned. Indeed, one entered and found Alistair borderline hypothermic, face pale, lips trembling. "We must stop," the monk insisted. "You could die, or lose your mind." But Alistair, half lucid, tried to protest. "No, I'm so close. Please." He collapsed, consciousness flickering. The monks carried him to a warmer cell, piling blankets around him, massaging his hands and feet. Lama Rinchen appeared with a thermos of scalding broth. As Alistair sputtered back to fuller awareness, the Lama's voice cut through the haze. "You have glimpsed the threshold. Now you see why it must be approached with caution." Tears stung Alistair's eyes. He hadn't achieved the stable, controlled vision he'd hoped, but he had touched something profound. The illusions had been more vivid than any drug-induced trip he'd read about. An otherworldly dimension seemed to beckon, yet the process nearly broke him. 5. Integration and aftermath. Alistair slept for an entire day. When he emerged, he felt oddly renewed yet shaken. The hallucinations lingered in his memory with uncanny clarity, as if they were real events. He recounted them carefully to Lama Rinchen, who listened with a compassionate smile. "What you experienced," the Lama said, "is a reflection of your own mind's vast capacity. With time, training, and a gentler approach, you could explore these realms without endangering your life." Alistair understood that the illusions were not the ultimate goal, merely signposts pointing to the fact that reality itself was malleable. However, he also recognized how easily one could slide into delusion or mania. In the following weeks, Lama Rinchen emphasized more balanced practice. Stable tummo sessions without extreme cold, healthy sleep patterns, and progressive dream yoga techniques focusing on gently inducing lucidity at night. Alistair's glimpses into the borderline realm became sporadic but more refined. Occasionally, as he drifted into sleep, bright surges of color heralded the onset of a dream, and he could watch them bloom, a calm observer, for precious seconds. Yet just as he was starting to settle into this new equilibrium, a letter arrived from the University of London. It carried with it echoes of his old life, and a twist that would catapult him back into the world he had momentarily left behind. Episode 5. Worlds Collide. 1. A summons from the west. A local messenger reached Drakkar Tasso with a small bundle of mail. Among it was a letter addressed to Dr. Alistair Harrow from one Dr. Mira Thompson at the University of London, his longtime colleague, a neuroscientist who specialized in sleep research. Curled by a yak butter lamp, Alistair read the words that made his heart pound. Dear Alistair, I hope this finds you well, wherever your field research has taken you. Something rather extraordinary has occurred. David Blaine reached out, asking about you. Apparently, he recalls your keen interest in his hallucinations during Frozen in Time. He's been in contact with our lab to propose a collaborative experiment on the physiological and neurological aspects of dreamlike states induced by extreme cold and sleep deprivation. Meanwhile, a new manuscript has surfaced in our archive, possibly related to the same lineage you're studying. Early analyses hint at advanced dream yoga practices. Our preliminary read suggests even wilder possibilities, such as bridging life and death states. We're conducting pilot EEG studies on volunteers staying awake in cold chambers, and we're seeing brainwave patterns akin to REM intrusion into wakefulness. It's reminiscent of your theories, and I'd value your insight. Could you return, even briefly, to consult? Be well, my friend. Mira. Alistair felt a surge of conflicting emotions. On the one hand, Drakkar Tasso had become a place of spiritual refuge. On the other, he was, at heart, a researcher. His original impetus for coming here was to glean knowledge to share with the world. Now, the academic world was calling him back. Second Lama Rinpoche's counsel. With trembling fingers, Alistair showed the letter to Lama Rinpoche. The Lama read it slowly, lips moving in silent contemplation. Then he placed the letter aside. So, your colleagues have discovered a window into these states, Lama Rinpoche said. They invite you to bring your knowledge to them? Alistair swallowed. Yes, Lama. I feel torn. Part of me wants to stay, to deepen my practice here. But I also sense that bridging this ancient wisdom and modern science might benefit many. The Lama regarded him with kind eyes. There is a saying, the bird has two wings. One is wisdom, the other is compassion. You have begun to develop insight here. Now perhaps it is an act of compassion to return and share what you've learned. If these scientists are studying the threshold between dreaming and waking, your perspective might guide them to do so responsibly. A wave of relief washed over Alistair. He was no longer that uncertain academic rummaging through dusty archives. The monks had bestowed a measure of direct experience and confidence. He bowed deeply. Thank you, Lama Rinpoche, for everything. Return when you can, the Lama replied, offering Alistair a small prayer wheel adorned with script. In your times of doubt, let this remind you of the truths you've seen. 3. Return to the City of Grey. Descending from Drakkar Tasso proved quicker than the ascent, though no less perilous. Dorje guided Alistair back to a drivable road, where he caught a weary bus to the nearest city with an airport. Soon enough, he found himself on a plane bound for London. Stepping off at Heathrow, he felt a strange culture shock. The metropolis was alive with noise, neon signs, and a ceaseless rush. The monastic stillness of the Himalayas seemed like a distant dream. Yet he felt a quiet fire within, something intangible, a new lens through which to view the familiar bustle. He returned to his Bloomsbury flat, dusted the furniture, and reacclimated to Western conveniences. Water came from a tap, hot at the twist of a knob. Heat radiated from a thermostat. No endless hours of chopping wood or hauling water. He recognized how easy it would be to let the Tummo discipline slide, lulled by comfort. 4. A meeting of minds and a magician. Within days, Alistair met Dr. Mira Thompson at the university lab. She greeted him with a hug. We've missed you. You look different, calmer, somehow. Alistair smiled. I've learned much, Mira. Tell me about these new EEG findings. They walked into a bright laboratory where volunteers, swathed in warm clothing, tested various levels of wakefulness in a climate-controlled chamber. Wires trailed from EEG caps, feeding real-time brainwave data to computer monitors. One subject had gone 36 hours without sleep in a near-freezing environment. The data spiked with occasional bursts of theta waves, usually associated with early sleep. Some subjects reported fleeting hallucinations, shapes or faces swirling in the corners of their vision. Alistair rubbed his chin. This aligns with what I observed personally. The next step is a stable method to integrate that borderline state. That's where tummo and structured meditation come in. Otherwise, it's chaos. Suddenly, the lab doors swished open and David Blaine strode in, flanked by a small camera crew. He wore a black jacket and exuded a calm self-assurance. Alistair felt a brief flutter of starstruck awe. Blaine approached with an outstretched hand. "Doctor Harrow," he said, smiling. "I'm glad you're back. I've been telling Dr. Thompson about the visions I had in the ice and about the rumors of Tibetan dream yogis. I want to push the boundary again, but this time with full scientific instrumentation and your guidance." Alistair drew a breath. "We have to be extremely careful. Prolonged cold and wakefulness can be dangerous, and the illusions can become overwhelming." Blaine's eyes gleamed. "I know, but this might open new vistas of understanding, for showmanship, sure, but also for science. I'm serious about exploring the frontier of human potential, and you're the man to help me do it." 5. The Ice Lab Experiment. Over the next month, the team assembled an experiment of unprecedented ambition, a sealed cold chamber in the university's research wing, rigged with advanced medical monitoring. David Blaine would enter it, wearing minimal clothing, aiming to remain awake and near freezing for up to 60 hours. Alistair and Mira's team would track everything: EEG, ECG, body temperature, oxygen saturation, pupil dilation, even microfacial expressions. The media buzzed at the news. Was it another grand stunt from Blaine? Journalists speculated. The university tried to frame it as a scientific collaboration, but skepticism lingered. Alistair insisted on robust safeguards, frequent check-ins, the possibility to abort if vitals dropped to risky levels. On day 1, Blaine stepped into the chamber, the temperature set near 3 degrees Celsius, 37 degrees Fahrenheit. Cameras streamed the event live to screens outside. A small crowd gathered: students, researchers, curiosity seekers. Blaine breathed slowly, sometimes adopting a posture Alistair recognized as vaguely tummo-like. At hour 30, Blaine showed signs of exhaustion, shivering occasionally, yet his focus remained strong. Journalists pressed against the glass, filming every tremor. Mira noted unusual EEG spikes reminiscent of hypnagogic patterns. Blaine spoke into a microphone from inside, describing fleeting flashes, colors, shapes, near dreams dancing around his peripheral vision. By hour 40, he was on the edge of collapse. Vitals teetered. Alistair, monitoring a screen, recognized the precarious state. "We may need to end this soon," he told Mira, but Blaine insisted on continuing, his resolve unshaken. Hour 48 brought a turning point. Blaine, blinking heavily, reported seeing a robed figure chanting, the same entity from his Times Square ice ordeal. EEG patterns soared into realms typically seen in REM sleep. "He's literally dreaming while awake," Mira whispered, astonished. The public cameras captured Blaine's face, contorting in wonder. He half smiled, half winced, describing a swirling tapestry of colors and chanting monks. Alistair recognized the phenomenon. This was the threshold that combined tummo-like breathing, minimal sleep, and cold. But at hour 52, Blaine's body began to fail. His core temperature plummeted, heart rate spiked. Medics rushed in, ignoring his pleas to continue. They forcibly removed him from the cold chamber, wrapping him in thermal blankets. The experiment ended amid a whirl of paramedics and frantic camera shutters. Though abruptly concluded, the experiment yielded reams of data. In subsequent days, Blaine recovered. Meanwhile, Alistair and Mira analyzed the EEG recordings. Never before had a documented instance of near-freezing, wakeful REM intrusion been so meticulously captured. 6. The unexpected messenger. As the media coverage swelled, some hailing the event as groundbreaking, others condemning it as reckless, Alistair returned to his office, intending to reflect on the moral and scientific implications. A secretary handed him an unmarked package. Inside was a single typewritten sheet, inscribed with arcane script in archaic Tibetan or Sanskrit. No return address. His heart jumped. He recognized the style from Guyagarba. The text mentioned advanced bardo practices, navigating the transitions between life, death, and dreaming. It hinted at a great luminosity that dawns for those who can remain lucid during the final dissolution of body and mind. The cryptic note concluded, "The illusions in ice are but child's play. True mastery requires crossing the threshold of life itself. Seek the rainbow gate." Alistair felt a chill. Who had sent this? Some hidden lineage keeper? A scholar from the same circles who had once annotated Guyagarba? Or something more uncanny? He stood by his office window, gazing at London's grey skyline. Had the robed figure from his visions crossed into waking reality to leave him a sign? Or was this a subtle invitation from the lineage that trained the fabled snow yogis? The questions multiplied. 7. A new horizon opens. Alistair closed his eyes, recalling the swirl of illusions in the Himalayan chamber, the fleeting robed apparition, Blaine's mesmerizing dream state on camera, and the quiet hush of Drakar Taso, where Lama Rinchen reminded him, reality is but a dream. Now, talk of bridging life and death. The bardo was upon him. Was he ready to venture even further, into territories where the line between existence and non-existence blurred, where the dream might extend beyond bodily demise? He exhaled slowly, a half-smile forming. The adventure was not over. In fact, it seemed only to be beginning anew, with higher stakes. Pondering the final line, "Seek the rainbow gate." He felt the ember of Tummo warming his core, a subtle echo of the Himalayan discipline. In that moment, Dr. Alistair Harrow realized that all he had accomplished, travels to remote monasteries, encounters with illusions in the frieze, bridging Eastern traditions and Western science, was merely the prologue to a far grander mystery. The illusions that blossomed in the cold might one day be dwarfed by illusions that beckoned from across the boundary of mortality itself. He glanced at the prayer wheel Lama Rinchen had gifted him, resting on a shelf. Perhaps the wheel would spin again, guiding him to places where dream merges with death, unveiling a cosmic tapestry. Until then, he would remain a scholar at heart, forever peering into the luminous, elusive corners of consciousness. The end, and yet the beginning. Author's note on scholarly and cultural references. Tummo, Getumo, inner heat practice. Tummo is documented in Tibetan Buddhist Vajrayana lineages, especially within the Kagyu and Nyingma schools. Early Western awareness emerged through accounts by Alexandra David Neal and scientific studies by figures like Herbert Benson. Physiologically, Tummo seems to correlate with voluntary control over sympathetic responses, potentially increasing body temperature through changes in metabolism and vasoconstriction. Dream Yoga, Milam. Milam is one of the 6 yogas of Naropa in Tibetan tradition. It emphasizes maintaining awareness during sleep and recognizing the dream as a dream, cultivating clarity and insight into the illusory nature of all phenomena. Western parallels exist in the study of lucid dreaming, popularized by researchers like Dr. Stephen LaBerge at Stanford, though the cultural and spiritual aims differ. Sleep deprivation and hypnagogia. Prolonged wakefulness can lead to hypnagogic and hypnopompic imagery, bridging waking consciousness and dreamlike phenomena. This is well documented in psychology, with extended experiments famously done by Randy Gardner, who stayed awake for 264 hours, and subsequent medical caution about hallucinations and micro-sleeps. Bardo concepts. Bardo refers to intermediate states, most famously between death and rebirth, from texts like the Bardo Thodol. However, it also covers transitions in daily life, including the states between waking and sleeping and between consciousness shifts. In some advanced Vajrayana practices, a seamless continuity of awareness is sought across all bardos, implying the potential to remain lucid even through the process of dying. Scientific correlates. In modern neuroscience, such phenomena might be framed in terms of REM intrusions, disruption of the thalamocortical networks, or heightened activity in certain areas of the default mode network. Integrating these phenomena with Buddhist meditative frameworks is an emerging interdisciplinary frontier. Potential dangers and ethical considerations. Extreme bodily manipulation, cold endurance, sleep deprivation. Without proper guidance risks hypothermia, cardiac issues, cognitive impairment, or permanent psychological harm. In monastic settings, the progression is gradual, building up internal resilience and mental stability to handle intense states. In performance or lab settings, the risk is higher without deep training.